morning, everyone. I'd like to call this special board meeting to order on 2/22/22, which is quite a date. And time is now 8:17. And the first item on the agenda is the adoption of the agenda as submitted. And we got a motion, we got a first and a second. Any public comment on the agenda before we take a vote? Seeing no in-person comment. Any online comment?
Let me check, Mr. Varner. No, Mr. Varner, thank you.
Then I will go ahead and call for a vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay.
Aye.
Thanks, Joe. Hearing no opposition, the motion carries. Next will be the flag salute. Mr. Mike Walker.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Before we move into the next agenda item, I'd just like to welcome all the in-person people we have here this morning. Thank you for attending, and also welcome for all those who may be listening to this proceedings via remote. This morning, agenda item number 3 is the Carson City School District Board of Trustees will interview the final 2 superintendent candidates in person. Each candidate will make a presentation on the following topic. Carson City School District is currently refreshing its strategic plan. Please present your understanding of the district's strategic plan and identify the ways you may strengthen it. The superintendent candidates will respond to questions posed by the trustees based on the content of their presentation. And the first interview we'll have this morning is Dr. John Goldhart. But before we start that, I want to introduce the board to you, Mr. Goldhart. Welcome to Carson City, number 1. I hope your stay is pleasant while you're here, even though we had some snow this morning. And go ahead and introduce the board. And to my immediate left is Lowell Crossman, Vice President. Then we have Lupe Ramirez, Mrs. Lupe Ramirez. She's the board clerk. Mr. Don Carini, Mr. Mike Walker, and Stacy Wilkie McCulloch. And then joining us remotely this morning is Trustee Joe Cassiopo. Joe, can you hear us okay? Joe, are you there?
Yeah. Sorry, yes, I can hear you. Hear me?
Okay. Then what we'll do is, just on behalf of the board, I'd like to thank you for your interest in serving as superintendent of the Carson City School District. I know we talked before via Zoom, but I'll just briefly explain the process for today. You'll have up to 90 minutes to make your presentation and answer questions that the board members may have. And during that time, you should also have time to ask us questions if you have any. And just to begin with, just make sure you have everything that you need and you're ready to start. Okay, then please go ahead and start.
Mr. President,
Yes.
may I suggest taking a brief recess until 8:30? The agenda actually calls 8:30 out as the time the interview will start.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, we'll be in recess until 8:30 then, just so we can be in alignment with the agenda. We'll go ahead and reconvene a special school board meeting. Dr. Goldhart, before you start your presentation, I just wanted to remind you that, don't think we're rude if we're looking down. We'll be taking notes throughout your presentation, but we will be listening intently to what you have to say. So anytime you're ready, please go ahead and start.
Turn this on. There we go. Thank you very much for the opportunity of being here in this beautiful community. It's nice to be back here in Carson City, a city that I've visited often. And as I was saying earlier, it's nice to have western powdered snow. We've had a lot of wet, cement-like snow for the past few years, but I quite like the powdered snow. It's my kind of snow. I like it. To begin with today, I thought it would be important to start with what I call the elephant in the room. Something that's been made known and that I think needs to be addressed because I believe I should be transparent with this board as well as with this community. I had every intention of staying in the Manchester School District for 5 to 10 years. I sold my dream home. A home that when I sold it, I could have never bought it again because of the inflation of the price, and now couldn't even consider even walking in the neighborhood because of the inflation of the price. Moved 2,700 miles, spent $20,000 in moving expenses, including having to live in a hotel for a month, as well as other expenses that come with moving, and was committed to stay in a community and work in a school district to help improve student learning. Unfortunately, things changed. It became difficult when signs popped up in the community with your name on them, saying things that aren't quite nice. And first of all, being a superintendent is never easy, no matter where you are, and I know that. But then when you start getting letters that are vile and mean, both to your home and to your place of work, as well as phone calls, or having eggs thrown at you when you're walking your dog, and having piles of feces left on your doorstep, are not something that I found pleasant. And that was when I came to the time where I felt it was time to move on. And the chair of our board, I let know that I was making a choice that I was going to be looking elsewhere. However, when I made application to this district and it became public and people had me in their Google alerts and it became front page news in our newspaper, then it became an issue. And through lots of negotiation with my attorney, I had to hire an attorney, as well as the district's attorney, we came to a separation agreement. It was not what I intended. My intention would have been to complete the school year where I was hired, and then when I was hired somewhere else or at my own choice, leave at the end of the year. I don't like to leave in the middle of something that I'm doing. And with that, I wanted to share something that I received from a retired teacher in the district. It says, "Dear Dr. Goldhart, I was very sad to hear that you are applying elsewhere to work as a superintendent of schools. After 21 years of schools teaching in the Manchester School District, you impressed me as no other previous superintendent. And it seemed like the district had chosen someone who was both competent and who possessed a necessary vision for the district. Through both normal times and pandemic times and post-pandemic times, that impression has not wavered. A past superintendent resigned abruptly in the middle of a year. Another previous superintendent suddenly left, and I believe had PTSD when they departed. One of your predecessors, Tom Brennan, worked for the district as an assistant superintendent, achieved a promotion to superintendent in another district, and chose to come back to work as a superintendent largely, I believe, because of his love and belief in our students. Even with such great competence and supreme dedication, he spent his time here with, as a previously retired colleague observed, a target on his back. He could do nothing right in the eyes of the teachers, the school board, the union leader, the alderman, or the public. The Manchester School District literally, and I make no exaggeration, killed him. You unfortunately seem to have that same decoration on the back of your suit jacket. It shouldn't be. The district, the city, and others need to change their attitude toward the superintendent of schools, and perhaps the schools in general. Though I harbor no great hope that this will ever change, I hope that you will impart such to those in positions of influence when you eventually leave. You have my prayers and best wishes as you pursue what is best for you and your family. We all work with ducks, not our fine feathered friends, but it's an acronym I call people who are determined to undermine, criticize, and kill success. We've all met them. I also, as we had the Super Bowl recently, there were hundreds of thousands of armchair quarterbacks across the country, as well as armchair coaches, making decisions, thinking they knew more. We also have throughout this country armchair superintendents who believe, and I know our current superintendent here could probably relate. In my community we have right now, there are multiple social media sites that are dedicated 100% to essentially complaining about the school system. People that none of us has ever met, individuals who have run multiple times for multiple offices and never won, but spend their time complaining about those who are in office or those who are in positions. And I'm sorry that many of you have been pulled into this, where these same individuals who complained while serving as superintendent and wanting me to leave were also angry that I chose to apply elsewhere, were also angry why I applied here and also wanted to make it known to you to try to make that bad. So I'm sorry that you had to have that happen to you. And as Taylor Swift said, haters are going to hate. And I'm sorry. However, we all have a choice. We can get better or we can get bitter. I choose to get better. And I just put it behind me and know that there are better times ahead. I purposely chose Carson City. I did a lot of research on this district. And the reason I chose this district is because it is an excellent district. It even has greater potential in a community that is a city district, that the city and the district work together, and there's this sense of pride. It reminds me of a district I worked in where I was a high school principal in Salt Lake County, the Murray City School District, and where there was just this sense of the school was the center, and I loved it. And it's a place I want to be, and I want you to know that. And I'm sorry that you've had to be involved with the mess of where I'm currently at. And I just wanted you to be aware of that. And before I go into the strategic plan part, those individuals who are at home may not know a little bit about my past. So I'm just going to quickly go over that for them. This is a picture of the high school I attended, Granite High School. It no longer exists. It was torn down 2 years ago and is now a subdivision. It was over 100 years old in a neighborhood that was very low income, served a very diverse student body. And I loved the school. It made a difference in my life. I began my career as a high school teacher in a high school of 3,000 students that was extremely crowded, that was not built for that many students. I then became a junior high assistant principal. From there became a high school assistant principal, then became a middle school principal, and then had the opportunity for a time to serve as a director of secondary education and a visiting professor of secondary education for a college that was becoming a university and had never had a secondary education program, and was able to design the program and teach in the program to help prepare future secondary teachers. Then from there became a high school principal, and then after that became a central office executive, and then became a superintendent. And all of those positions I've loved, and all of them I've learned from and enjoyed immensely. But in regards to the strategic plan, your strategic plan, Empower Carson City 2022, focuses on exceptional administrators, teachers, and staff, healthy generations of Carson City students, community and full partnership, engaged parents and families, and curriculum that matters. And in researching the district, you have met a lot of these goals. You have a very active community that is involved, and you have focused on improving your curriculum. And your community has been a partner. But as all districts across the country experienced, and one that changed all of us, is this. We had what I call the COVID explosion that just simply changed everything in what we were doing. It affected our plans, it affected how we taught, it affected how kids behaved, it affected who was coming to school, it affected who was not coming to school. There were kids that we did not know what happened to. Kids' attitudes changed. When we went into remote status, we didn't know how kids were doing for a time. There were kids who would not show their faces on screen. There were kids who wouldn't even go on screen. And it impacted learning. And at the same time, goals that were in place had to actually be put on hold or could not be met because of that explosion. That's what I've called it. Also at the same time, COVID gave us an opportunity to have a springboard to change the way we do education. Because we had to pivot so quickly into regards how we did education, we were actually able to do some reform that we couldn't have done before. And it gave us an opportunity to try some things that have been effective in working with students and families. And what I would like to do today is look at that and think of an opportunity right now as we look into the future past 2022. But before doing that, I want to provide a framework and thinking about how we do education and why we need to think differently about education as you prepare for the next strategic plan. So first, I go back to 1892. In 1892, the NEA put together the Committee of 10. These were 10 men from throughout the country who were asked to come up with, what should we do with kids past 8th grade? Should we have a uniform high school system in our country? And the Committee of 10 came up with a plan that we would consider K through 8 kind of an elementary system that all kids could have, and then a 9 through 12 system we would have called a high school system. And that we should uniformly teach things like English and math and civics and chemistry and biology. And it stuck. These subjects probably sound familiar to all of us. And it really hasn't changed much since. And with that, let's look at this classroom. This is a classroom from the 1900s. You see the kids there in rows. The boys are all separated from the girls. That's what we did. And you see the chalkboards on the walls. The kids are really crammed there together to get them to all fit in the room. But also in the 1900s, there was a lot of factory work going on. I see a lot of similarities in the design of the classroom to how the factories were designed, because that was the time we were preparing for that type of workforce. It was an industrial era, and we were preparing students for that era. But then when we go to 2022 and we look at our classrooms, we have to ask ourselves, has much changed? Despite what's happened in our economy and the needs of today's economy and today's students. So for example, let's think about a surgeon in 1922 and a surgeon in 2022. If a surgeon from 1922 was able to get into a time machine and come to today, I don't think they'd be able to perform surgery. Things would change so much, they would have to relearn everything and would probably be blown away by the advances in technology and the way surgery was done. But unfortunately, a teacher from an earlier era could probably, with a little support, come into a current classroom and may be able to pick up on a couple of things, because a lot of the same methods of teaching are still in place today, 100 years later. John Dewey in 1916 said, "If we teach today as we taught yesterday, we rob our children of tomorrow." And as we look at today's students have changed. I would not be looking like this when I was in school. I might have had a Walkman, and it had a tape player in it. And that would have been the extent of the modern technology of my day. But I would not have had an iPhone or an iPad or a laptop in my hand. Completely different generation, completely different understandings, and in my opinion, a much smarter and savvy generation of students. Let's consider this. So we look at our 12th graders today. The percentage of 12th graders who have a driver's license right now is only 60%. Not as many kids today are getting a driver's license. It's just very interesting. Yet in 1980, 90% of students had a driver's license. Now this one is a good one. There are 57% of 12th graders today have tried alcohol, much lower than when the first statistics were taken in 1994 of 83%. That one's a hurrah, in my opinion. Students who were working part-time, working for money, today, 50%. 1980, 90% were doing so. Students who were dating. Now, students in 12th grade who've actually dated, 47%. 1980, 87%. Much different. Change with our kids. Now, this interesting Venn diagram comes from a lot of research that's been done about what the skills are that students need to be successful in today's job market, where you take what's called basic cognitive skills, self-leadership skills, and interpersonal skills, and combining those into future success skills. It's quite overwhelming when you look at it in that sense, but what I've done is separated them into the new basics. I'm a real fan of Bill Daggett, who does a lot of research on what kids need to be successful in today's world. And he put these in these categories. So first of all, in one category, in the new basics, students need to know how to synthesize messages. They need to understand time management, organizing, how to adapt, reasoning skills, and a big one, creativity. I know that when I spent some time in some schools in Japan on an exchange, the Japanese superintendent and principals asked me over and over again, how do you get your students to be creative? We want our students to be creative like the Americans because that's something we really want. And then we were asking them, how do you get your students to be so focused in their work? Because we don't have, our students aren't as focused as yours. The other ones, fostering inclusiveness, having better communication skills and empowering others to be successful, accountability, self-control, the ability to not get upset or to say things we shouldn't say, self-care, and coping. Then, virtual communication. These are some things we learned during the pandemic that we'll continue to need. Digital collaboration. How do you collaborate with people digitally and in an effective way? Tech transactions, digital literacy, what's good and bad online, smart devices, a big one and a high need right now, cybersecurity, and also digital ethics. In addition, as a framework, as we think about the future, looking at the percent of time spent on using skills in the workplace, as we compare those in the lowest wage quintile compared to those in the highest wage quintile jobs. So those that have physical and manual skills, the lowest wage quintile has the highest need for physical and manual skills. The highest wage quintile has the lowest. But as we look at others, basic cognitive skills. So basic reading skills, basic math skills. The lowest wage quintile, 18%. The highest, only 6% need those. We add higher cognitive skills, reasoning, higher order thinking. Lowest wage, 13%. Highest wage, you get 25%. Social and emotional skills, self-awareness, understanding others, interpersonal skills. Big difference here. 15% in the lowest wage quintile, 39% in the highest wage quintile. And then lastly, technology skills. Only 5% in the lowest wage, 26% in the highest wage. So it's interesting looking at that, of the differences in regards to the skill sets needed in those wage sets in today's economy. And the reason I share that is because we have to know what our kids need as we plan what we need to do in our schools. And look at this bridge. Our kids are different. Our workplace, home, and society have needs. So how do schools bridge the gap? We do that through what I call a strategic plan or a map, because maps get us places. And I use the map as well as standing for a Millennial Achievement Plan. I remember the first time I used a GPS. It wasn't one that was part of the car. You had to buy a little device, and it had that really annoying voice. Our family went to SeaWorld. We lived in St. George, Utah at the time, and my wife was a delegate to the National PTA Convention. So I took the boys to SeaWorld, and I'm following what it was saying, and we ended up in a parking lot behind SeaWorld that you couldn't get to SeaWorld. And it took us about an hour to really find SeaWorld because the GPS was wrong and the map wasn't right. Maps matter. And when we follow the right map to the right destination, it's kind of exciting to get to where you're supposed to be. Strategic plans provide the map of helping guide school districts in getting to the destination of having students be successful. And with that, you can take different approaches to strategic planning. I was highly involved with the strategic planning process when I started my superintendency. And we took a very comprehensive approach. And I believe in a comprehensive approach that can be a bit messy and time-consuming. But the key is, a comprehensive plan shouldn't be something we do to people. It should be something we do with people. Because the more participation we have, the more buy-in we have, so that we actually achieve what's in the plan. So here are a few of the groups that should be participating: the Board of Trustees, parents, community members, students should be involved, teachers, support staff, central office leadership, and school leaders. Support staff would include paraprofessionals, bus drivers, custodians, so forth. You get the voice of all, and you end up getting a better plan, because people are going to think of things that we can't think of. And I've always believed none of us is as smart as all of us, and we will get better ideas. And with the mantra, we have to prepare students for their future and not our past. So here's what I would do. Step 1, gathering community data. You gather both perceptional and opinion data. Survey our stakeholders with a very limited number of questions. In addition, I'm a fan of also canvassing neighborhoods, including people without children in school. And we take an extra effort to include those who are traditionally not involved or have not been asked or have not been part of being part of the district or have not been asked to have their opinions asked. And then we involve and utilize translation services. So our friends who do not read English or understand English as well have their voices heard. What is the purpose? It's these two essential questions. What is the school community's perception of the district? What are the common themes? Both those that are stellar and those that may not be so stellar. We need to know both because they help us understand what the community is thinking. The next step is looking at learning data. We take a deep dive into our learning data in the district. Look at the state accountability learning data, our on-time graduation rate, chronic absenteeism, bullying, look at English language arts data, math data, but we need to look more at the disaggregated data. How are each subgroup doing? By gender, by ethnicity, IEP, English language learner, poverty rates, and so forth. With the essential question, who is learning and who is not learning? And I would also add, what is being learned and what is not being learned? So we know that information. And in addition, other measures should be looked at. Looking at our history of the number of students who have 1 or more F grades. College and career readiness, such as ACT data, AP enrollment trends, Algebra 2 completers. Algebra 2 is the gateway for college success. And when you look at the Algebra 2 completers, you're going to get a pretty good look at how well you're going to have students do afterwards in college. The other one that I think is important that a lot of districts don't look at is FAFSA. How many students are filling out the FAFSA form, the free federal student aid forms, and a college application. We would want to have every senior filling out at least one college application form. and that every senior is filling out a FAFSA form, even if we don't know if they'll qualify, so they at least have the option of having that support. And then the other one that I believe and is very important to me, and I know makes the most important difference in students' success from 3rd through 12th grade, is reading proficiency. Looking at reading, those students that are reading at grade level at grade 3. You can predict how successful students will be through 4th through 12th grade based upon their reading proficiency. And if you can see that data and then make interventions from that time forward, you would be able to make a major difference in your graduation rate. So having that data. So here's an example, doing the deep dive. Looking at the Nevada report of your district, in 2019, there was a 15.3% chronic absenteeism. In 2021, there was 41% chronic absenteeism. I have a sneaking suspicion that the COVID explosion may have had something to do with that, because I know where I was, we had a huge jump in absenteeism during that time. Math proficiency, 2019, 43% at the elementary, 2021, 34%. Again, questions in the deep dive. Is this pandemic related? Are there plans in place currently, because I don't know, but there may be, to address the unfinished learning? Did the test instrument change? When disaggregated by subgroup, are there noticeable trends in those areas? Were there certain groups that were affected more than others during that shift in the data? And then we address that in the plan. Then the next step. All that data comes forward, and it would come to what I call a community action group. And all those different groups that I shared earlier, we have representatives from those groups that come together, and they get that opinion and learning data summaries, and they come together and say, here are the themes we're seeing, and develop goals. And at first, they may end up coming up with 50, which is way too many. And so they have to delimit and delimit and delimit and prioritize, and then come up with their preliminary goals or themes that should matter. Then, the other thing that they have to address, that sometimes isn't, are other compelling issues in the community. Housing, because it impacts the school district. In the West, and I know in Nevada, housing prices have gone up a bit. Probably not a bit, a lot. Health, what is the health like of our community in regards to health care and those that are getting health care? Employment and employment opportunities. What do we see in the future of employment in the area? And economic development. This is where we work with our local partners, cities, community development partners, in knowing what those issues are. Then after that, what I call the finishing touches. The finishing touches are, they've delimited it, they put their goals together, the plan, but they have to add a timeline. I like putting the timeline into 3 categories: now, next, and later. And you put kind of times in those areas. Then you need evidence. What evidence do you need for each of those areas to show that those goals have been met? And because we're a public entity, I like the idea of having a dashboard, probably put on the district's website, where all the evidence from each of those goals that is collected is put in that dashboard for public view. And so that we're able to know what we've done, so we can celebrate it as well. Each of the areas should have an owner. Who is responsible? Who oversees that area? Then we should have a fiscal implication. Does this particular need in the plan have a fiscal implication for cost, and what is it? And then also, how do we share this plan? So it is well known, it is well advertised, everybody knows what it is, and it is not a secret with anybody. Then when that is put together, We have feedback groups. The community action group takes the preliminary plan, meets with the Board of Trustees, says, here's what we've come up with. The Board of Trustees says, here's some feedback. They meet with some educator groups. They meet with some parent groups. They meet with some student groups. They meet with the Chamber of Commerce. They meet with some student groups, some nonprofit groups. They gather the feedback again, polish the plan up, and then a final draft is completed. And then at that point, the Board of Trustees have the final approval. And of course, that plan becomes a living, using document. And it is aligned with the budget. It is aligned with policy. It is aligned with how we hire. It's aligned with how we do professional learning. It's aligned with curriculum alignment and adoptions. And it's aligned with the superintendent goals and evaluation. It is the center of what we do. And this, I just want to share with you, it just shows a lot of words to remind us of the why. Why this is important as we think about the students. I'm not going to put the sound on. It's obnoxious. Pretty important what we do. And having a plan in place that helps guide, direct, and help students succeed is important. And the why are the students. They're the reason we're here. They're the reason we do this. And we want them to succeed. Then, of course, the most important step of this process is we get to work. We get down and we do it. We adapt as we need to. and we help our students succeed. Thank you.
Thank you for the very good presentation. At this time, we'll open it up for questions from any of the board members. And Mike, you want to start?
Good morning.
Good morning.
So thinking about the beginning of your presentation and when you talked about the treatment of superintendents and I think a lot of civil servants right now, you know, we've experienced some of those similar things, probably not to that scale, but similar treatment of our superintendent. And in Nevada, everything that happens with superintendents is in the open. And so how do you anticipate dealing with that if similar situations happened here in Carson City?
Actually, I believe having it in the open is better, because then everyone is able to see what is said and what is done, and you don't have some parts that are behind closed doors and some parts that aren't. And the more transparent it is, it just makes it, I don't know how to describe it, but it keeps it from rumorizing. I know that's not a word, but the less rumorizing, the better. And I know there is no perfect situation, but there are just some cases that are not as perfect as others. And you just have to make a decision on what is best for you as a person and what is best for your family. And I think the transparency system that is here is actually a healthy system. Like the way you've done this process in hiring, I've been impressed with, because there's no secrets. And when there's no secrets, you don't have the rumor mongering. It's hard to rumor monger when it's open.
If I could just follow up on that then, what caused things to go so bad back there in Manchester?
I'm going to sit down if you don't mind.
Sure.
Meeting. Turn this off. What started was when I interviewed here, and it became open. And I don't know why, because it had been known that I was. And just the fact that the newspaper there had made it a major story. What was always reported isn't always what was the facts. And the other part that has to be noted is that the board I started with and the board that is in place now, of the 15 board members, there's only one that I started with. Because they have their elections every 2 years for the entire board. And there was that much turnover. And just the changes in belief and approach. I look back and I think, you know, what could I have done to have made that happen? The other part that started, I know with the local paper, they started their attacks when I testified in favor. They had a charter commission that was looking at separating the school district from the city so that the school board could have autonomy, set their own budgets, have their own chair, and I supported it. And that didn't go over well with their editorial board. And from that point forward, I was on their hit list.
So these vile comments you were getting and egg throwing and everything, that all started after you applied at our district here?
No, that was before, and that was more over, I was being accused of teaching CRT, which we weren't, of certain employees in the district who said I wasn't fair, and these were people I really had no association with. And unfortunately, it's just been a history with superintendents. I don't understand it because I tried really hard to have an open, caring, good relationship. And I also was very assertive in trying to change the tone of the district. And that's not always favorable. When you have the lowest graduation rate in the state, when you have a district that hasn't adopted a reading program in 15 years, and you adopt one and you expect people to follow it, when you haven't had a math program adopted in 10 plus years, and you expect people to follow it, there's some angst. And when you have a system in place where you have students leveled and where they are also tracked, and it's hard to get out of those tracks and low levels, and you want to change that system so all students can be taught the same high-level curriculum, there's unhappy people. But I can't sit back and see students not succeeding. And so you have to make decisions and say things that may not be popular.
Thank you. Any other questions from the board right now? Joe?
Yeah, Rich,
Go ahead, Joe.
Laurel can go first if she wants.
Just a general question. Have you ever received a letter of admonition or been disciplined by an
No.
employer?
Never.
Joe, go ahead.
Yeah, Dr. Goldhart, thank you for being here. You know, we're taking this very serious, as you said, and we appreciate you paying attention to what we're trying to do. This is obviously very important to us, to me, and we want a superintendent that doesn't just promise us things, but can do his best or her best to achieve those in a manner that brings us together and not further divides us, if you will. We're not divided because of our superintendent. We have a great deal of respect for him, and he's done a great job. But with COVID and everything, certainly it's been a challenging environment. What I'm wondering is your understanding. You know, I look at a few things, but our current elementary and math proficiency and our high school ACT scores, and everybody wants to always improve those and, you know, get our students to the next level. And I guess my question to you is, assuming COVID is starting to trend down, what's your goal over, say, the next year to 3 or 5 years in terms of reading proficiency, math scores, and ACT scores? And how will we accomplish this while at the same time recognizing and dealing with teacher and staff fatigue?
Yeah, because there's been, there's been a lot of fatigue, massive fatigue with our teaching staff. I think the first step is you need to get a group of teacher leaders and sit down with them and look at the current system. What curriculum programs are in place? What do our data trends say? And develop systems to help that improvement. What professional learning is in place to help our teachers in guiding and helping them? Are there teacher leaders in place to provide support to our teachers in teaching our students? In regards to ACT, ACT provides districts with some incredible data in regards to college readiness and each of the subtests. And those are aligned to specific course-taking alignment. And then looking at the school level and seeing, are the students taking these courses? And how are they doing in these courses? And then going back to the counselor level, and are students being prepared or encouraged to take these particular courses so that they are ready to take that particular course? Now, in regards to the reading and math, the first part of reading is K3, and the greatest emphasis in reading needs to take place in K3. And if you put a lot of investment in K3 reading instruction and materials, you'll have more students who are successful after that. However, there still needs to be effective reading instruction post third grade and in the secondary system, because at that point, they're reading at the content level and providing our content level teachers with the support they need for reading in their content. In regards to math, math needs to have the alignments they need working in a K-12 system where these teachers are working together and making sure that they have that K-12 alignment of teaching each level that needs to be done, that they've mapped out the content, that they are working with one another and supporting one another, and then analyzing their data at each level and seeing, okay, how are our students doing? What are the gaps? How do we address those gaps? And so that it becomes an us approach to helping our students. And we're not doing it as a, oh, you've done a terrible job, that's awful, you need to fix this. But instead, we are here to help you be successful with your students. Let's put systems in place to help you be successful, and then help our teachers lead the effort and help support them in that effort in their curriculum alignment. It takes a great deal of work and a great deal of aligning that with district curriculum specialists and teacher leaders and teacher support, but it can be done. And it's a very exciting opportunity. And you start to see results, and you start to see some excited teachers who know that they can get the work done. I know when I was a high school principal and we started working with our middle school teachers in math and did that alignment, we saw improvement. And you also saw a greater partnership between the two wanting to work together.
Joe, you have any other questions?
Just in terms, and I admit it's a hard question to answer, but based on where we're at now, and I know there's more you'll need to learn about our district, but as far as time frames go, do you think when you look at reading and math proficiencies and ACT scores, there's room for growth? And what kind of reasonable growth, if any, could we expect under your leadership? Knowing that, your job is going to be to put these things in place and make sure other people are carrying those duties out. What kind of growth percentage, if any, could you foresee over the next few years?
I always believe there's room for growth. That's what we're in. I'm in the growth business, and I like growth. And if I'm not going to focus on growth, then I shouldn't be here. As in regards to the amount of growth, I would need to dig in more to get what I think it should be. But I like the idea of incremental. I think it's a little foolhardy to say we're going to grow by 10%, in this amount of time. But instead look at more incremental growth that's doable and helps people feel successful. To have a 2% growth in ACT scores is extremely difficult. ACT score growth takes a lot of work because those scores, the change rate in an ACT score is much harder than a state assessment. And so those scores are a little harder to do. So you need to look at like 1% and 2% growth quartiles improvements because of the difficulty of getting those to go up based upon the national norms. And they norm those each year depending on who's taking the test. And so it becomes a little more difficult to predict. So I would do that on that one. And then on the state level ones, you can also look between you want to look at about a 2 to 3% range if possible, and then working that out. But you want to do it with your district folks. It shouldn't be my goal. It should be our goal, where with the Board of Trustees, with our district leadership team, with our principals, with our teacher leaders, it becomes our goal that we focus on.
Good, thank you.
Any other questions from the board? Stacy?
Thank you, Dr. Goldhart. You talked about when you tried to implement change, you got a lot of angst. I'm sure you're aware of being an outsider and coming into a small community that there is a lot of angst going on right now with the change. We've been very blessed to have Mr. Stokes for as long as we have and had good superintendents that stayed a long time before that. But my question is, how do you handle that angst? Because it's a different angst with the community. It's a different angst with our teachers, our administrators, our district staff. How do you handle that kind of change? Because none of us are really good at change.
Absolutely, change is not easy. And that's why the number one priority I would have after being hired would be relationship building. The greatest lesson I learned in Manchester, as important as it was to get some things done that I got done that I'm very proud of, is that you have to take a step back and remember the impact of change on people that are scared. And you have to remember that. So first and foremost is developing the relationships of trust. Because if you don't have the relationships of trust, you will not get anything done. So I need to develop those relationships with our principals. I need to develop those relationships with the district staff. I need to develop those relationships with you so that we work together on behalf of the students of the district. And that's why I was so, I shared that entry plan with the group, because I have to spend that investment. And it's not just a one-time thing. It's an ongoing project of meeting, talking, listening, outreach. It's just like something I did not long ago. I had a group of 11 teachers in a school that was extremely concerned about issues that were happening that they had worked out, because I don't like them to jump levels. And they had met with individuals and, it hadn't worked out. And so I met with them and spent about 2.5 hours mostly listening, taking copious notes, and then afterwards getting the right people in place to help deal with the situation. And the greatest compliment I got from the group was that they said for the first time they had felt heard. And that meant a lot to me. And I want people to feel heard, and not just heard, but then acted upon after. So you have to develop that first. And of course, I would want to be part of the community. I would buy a home. My wife and I would become part of the community, be part of the events in the community, be active in community events, and be involved with all that goes on in the community. And we would want to work with people in the community, because something else I would want to do is I have like this half sheet that it says I noticed, and then just randomly go into classrooms and I just say I noticed. I always put something positive and I just leave it on their desk. It's not an evaluation. So teachers know I noticed you're doing these good things. and they need to know. And then I need it because I need that too. I need to be in classrooms because it makes me feel good. But I have to keep those connections. I have to stay connected with people in the district. Because if you lose that, then you start losing the opportunity to get things done. And so that'll always be a top priority, especially after you've had a successful tenure of an excellent superintendent. And as I said before, you build upon that success. And as I mentioned earlier, the worst enemy of a leader is arrogance. And so you need to come in with humility and with care and with understanding.
Laurel?
I have a question for you in regards to the investment in K through 3 reading that you mentioned. Nevada does have a read by grade 3 bill. There are certain positions that we must hire. There are burdens placed upon teachers within the classrooms for individual learning plans for students. However, there's no state funding for that read by grade 3 program. How would you make an investment in K3 reading with limited to no funds?
This sounds familiar. After spending 30 years in Utah, I know what it's like to work with no funding and unfunded mandates. You have to start looking at creative ways, and unfortunately, you also have to look for soft money, is what I call it, that's not permanent, and other options to try to have that happen. I'd have to look into the budgets, because I haven't seen your budgets, and take a deep dive into those. It's unfortunate when you have that happen, when the state says, we want this done, but we won't give you any money for it, because it is so important. That K through reading is the priority. And I would need to find out how we could make it happen with the funds we have or with personnel we have without it then hurting something else in the district. And that's not easy to do. And unfortunately, whatever you do, someone won't like it because it ends up hurting somebody because you have to take from Paul to pay Peter or from Henry to pay Norman. And it isn't right, but it is what it is in our state of funding. I am a real advocate for reading literacy. And I would want to make sure we could do everything we could to make that happen. And it would be one of my priorities in regards to legislative lobbying and working at that level, going over to the Capitol and working with our legislators. I'm trying to get other superintendents to do the same because they can't not fund that if they want it to happen. I'm sure Superintendent Stokes has had the same dilemma in trying to get them to do that. But I have to look at our budgets and find a way to have it happen. That is unfortunate that that's the state law or the state budget. That makes me sad.
Mr. Walker?
So I think one of the things that, just in my experience, we're always going to be dealing with is funding and student achievement. If you really looked ahead, big picture, if you were to be offered and accept this position, what supports will you need to be successful?
I would need to have the opportunity to have the ability to say, here is what I have found, to have this happen. And trustees, will you allow this and allow this to take place? Because when you're working in getting change to happen for good, it doesn't happen unless you have a board and superintendent working in tandem. It's the only way. And then when you have a district staff working in tandem with you, and I know you have an excellent district staff here, as I've looked at that, that's in place. You've got to work hand in hand, but I would have to be very transparent. I'd have to be very clear. And we may not agree, but then we'd have to come together on a compromise, and that's how that works. You are the trustees, I'm not. And in the end, we work together. You can't magically get money out of the air. I know you'd love it, but you can't. And not everything is always money related. Sometimes you can do things with policies and procedures that can help it, but it sure helps. But remember, I worked in the state that has the lowest funding in the nation for many years, and so I understand.
Any other questions from the board? Joe, do you have anything else?
No, I'm okay. Thank you.
I have, I think, several, if I could. One of the concerns that has been expressed by community members, staff members, is just how long your tenure would be here if you were to be hired. Would you care to address that?
Absolutely. As I mentioned before, my absolute intent before was to stay long-term. I wouldn't have moved that far and purchased a house and sold a house if it wasn't. You can't be successful. I mean, you need a long-term commitment as a superintendent to get things done the way you want done. And I would want that long-term. I don't like moving around. I want to have a place to hang my hat for a long time. And I'm not looking at coming here for 1 or 2 years and then buzzing out. I applied here to stay here. And unfortunately, what's happened to me in my current district has put a black eye in that regard. But I am committed to staying here. This is an incredible opportunity. It's an incredible opportunity for any superintendent candidate to be in a city district this size with this city support, community support, and to have that long-term opportunity to develop a district to pick up where Superintendent Stokes has stopped, and to pick up and continue to grow and grow and grow and get better is a dream of a superintendent. And I don't want to just hang out for a little while. I want to live here for a long while and work here and invest myself in this district. And when that time comes, when I retire in a long while, that I walk away saying, wow, look what we've accomplished. We have accomplished this. We've improved this. Our students have done this. Our schools have done this. And my intention is to stay here a long while. And I understand the concern. I absolutely do. And I'm letting you know, if hired, I'm committed. I'm not looking at a short term.
Okay, that's good to hear. I have one other quick question, and you talked a lot about the high school graduation rates and the effect it has on dropouts and et cetera. Could you let us know and the community know what the graduation rate was at Manchester High School when you first got there and what it is currently as you're departing?
The graduation rate, let's see, what was it? It improved by like a 0.50, and that was the first improvement in 8 years. And it's a total average of like 70%, which is the lowest in the state. One of our high schools was only 58%, and it was bad. We didn't have an alternative school. I tried to get one to start, but that didn't happen. But it wasn't acceptable for me. It's not acceptable anywhere.
Anybody else have any questions for the doctor? Lupe?
Just a follow-up question on President Gardner's question to you about how long you anticipate being here. You said long time, but can you give us an approximate amount of years that you see yourself being here for?
Well, I want to work 10 more years before I retire. And when I went to Manchester, my intention was to stay there 10 years. And if the climate wasn't what it was, I would have. And so that would be my intention, that would be my preference here. I don't like it. I don't like moving. I hate it. And again, as a superintendent, and I know Superintendent Stokes can relate to this, you get much more done when you're long-term. It is a much better leadership experience when you're long-term. And I would prefer that. That would be my preference. I would like to retire here.
And I don't really think that's a fair question, because we don't know what's going to happen. I didn't think that I'd be a widow at 56. That wasn't my plan either. So I appreciate the answers, but we just don't know what's going to happen in everybody's lives.
That's very true. Any other questions by the board? Mike?
So, and I agree, this is a great opportunity. This is a great school district and a great community. We have great staff. And so we're taking this process really seriously. And so why are you the person to lead us forward? What makes you the top candidate? And what can we expect to see from a Superintendent Goldhart?
I think one of my top qualities is, number one, I care. I truly care about the success of every student. I care about the state of education. I care about the quality of education. And I also care about those students who traditionally do not have a successful education. They are the students I worry about the most. And I just don't like to talk about them. I want to make sure we do something about them. The other reason is that while management matters, it's not the top priority. I'm a learning leader. I'm about learning. Learning has always been my priority. I've always been focused on teaching and learning. The best ways of teaching, the best ways of learning. I've always stayed abreast of those, the best research, the best practices, and how to implement them. I've always been fully involved in regards to implementation of good quality practices to help students improve. And I am someone who likes to collaborate with people. I like working with individuals, talking with individuals, working out situations with individuals. I'm not a flamboyant person. I'm not a flashy person, but I am real. And I care deeply about children being successful. If you're interested in a learning leader, I'm a learning leader. If you're interested in a politician, I'm not a politician. It's probably my weakest area. And I apologize for that if that's what you're after, because I don't do very well at being a politician, although I understand politics very well. And I have had great success working with unions, which surprises me, but I have. And utilizing our unions to be partners and helping get things done on behalf of students and on the professionalism of our teachers. And I also like to work with parents in helping our parents and know that parents are the first teacher of our children and recognizing that and respecting that. And I've also am effective at working with community groups. I'm currently on the board of directors for the Chamber of Commerce. I'm on the board of directors for the Boy Scouts. And I like working with these groups and nonprofits that care about kids. You have to reach out, and I like doing that. But again, what sets me apart is my tenacity for focusing on and a laser-like approach to student learning, what I see and understand about how we can turn the needle towards success, and working with people and not doing things to people, and taking lessons that I've learned from my experience. I've had a lot of experience, and it's given me a lot of wisdom, both the good and the bad. And I think that helps me. In fact, I know it helps me to be a successful person. And I know the West. I understand. And I love the values of the West because I am a Western person, and that's who I am. And this isn't just, as I've said before, this isn't a vocation for me, it's an advocation. I love working with students. I love working with teachers. I love working with principals. What we do matters so much. Public schools are essential to our country. What we do preserves democracy. It absolutely preserves democracy. So we have to do an effective job.
Any other questions from the board? Joe, you have anything else?
No, the few other questions I had were asked by some of the other trustees, so I appreciate that.
All right, thank you. Dr. Goldhart, you have it's about 13 minutes before 10, which gives you a little bit of time to ask questions if you so desire.
The first question would be is the board open to having retreats with the superintendent for planning purposes, developing goals for the year, and so forth?
Mike or Stacy, you want to take a shot at that?
Well, I would say yes. I mean, we'd have to work with our legal counsel because it'd have to be an open meeting. But I think,
Noticed.
yeah, we are collaborative, and we're looking for an open relationship with whoever we hire. So that's something that I don't think not only are we open to, we probably would expect that, especially as we begin this journey with a new person as superintendent.
And I would agree with that. Any other questions?
Yeah, Rich.
Joe, go
Oh,
ahead.
Rich, this is Joe. Yeah, I thought Mike said that well. Dr. Goldhart, yeah, we really expect that. I think that's important, that collaboration piece, not only between you, the district staff, and the individual teachers and staff are important, but certainly with the board of trustees. So me personally, I would be open to those retreats. And again, we just have to do it in accordance with legal counsel advice and whatnot, but I think that's all doable.
Thank you. What about board development? What type of board development or training does the board get involved with?
Laurel, go
I was
ahead.
just going to say, Nevada actually requires a certain number of hours for school board trustees to receive in training every 2 years. So we are very involved in professional development as board members. We attend trainings multiple times a year. That's something we're committed to.
The three of us have been Mike and Laurel and I have been very involved at the state level at the board trainings. I was president, Laurel was president, Mike's been our director for a couple years. So we've been very involved in helping develop our board development for the state.
And I'll also say that every training that's been offered through NASB, I believe every board member has attended. either in person or remotely. So we're very committed to board development and continual education for the board members.
That's excellent. We didn't have that.
Go ahead, Joe.
You know, and oh, sorry. And along with that, you know, I think individually we all stay involved in varying degrees by trying to attend the PLCs, school meetings. You know, some of us have sat on master planning committees, bond advisory committee meetings, and just trying to not only, you know, we'll educate ourselves in the many aspects of the school district, being involved in the community, seeing how the master planning process moves forward and the importance of getting the community involvement. So I think what you have in front of you is really an active board in the community and with training.
That's excellent.
And most of us have had our kids go through this school district, and Laurel and I actually went through this school district ourselves, so we're pretty,
You're well-versed.
yeah, vested. Yeah.
Wow. And then what committees, are there board committees as well, like policy or finance or things like that?
Yeah, there's quite a few different committees, but every year the trustees are assigned a certain committee or volunteer to sit on a certain committee. Like this year, I'm sitting on the bond oversight committee. We have the Parks and Rec committee. Go ahead and name some others for them. So each board member has a committee they sit on. And also right now, being the president, I sit on as a member of the parent teachers? I forget the name of it, but it's the Carson City School District Foundation,
Foundation.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, education.
the school foundation.
Yeah, I was thrilled to see you have a foundation. That's great.
They're pretty active, and they really try to assist the kids of the community. And the teachers, you know, they give out mini grants throughout the year to different teachers who apply. So it's a very good organization. So anyway, to answer your question, we all sit on different committees.
And then what's been the practice with the superintendents, for the superintendent doing professional development? What has been the practice, like their membership in AASA and so forth?
I'll let Mr. Stokes talk about that.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dr. Goldhart, the state of Nevada is organized in school districts based on county boundaries. So there's only 17 superintendents. And you'll find there a wonderful group of individuals that have years of experience and knowledge. And that group meets monthly. And from those meetings, there's generally a political agenda that is aimed at the legislative sessions, and then the year when there's an off session. It's important that, again, we link arms and we do what's best for the students in the state of Nevada. And so it's a great group. AASA, I know that was just recently held, and I have the ability either to join or not to join. They're a great resource, obviously. So that has always been encouraged, as have other PD opportunities for the superintendent have always been made available by our trustees.
Thank you.
Now, I wasn't sure if your question involved, does the superintendent here provide professional development to
no.
others?
Yeah, no, it's just about what you get. I'm excited about what the School Boards Association is providing. That is incredible. And then as you look to the future, as far as Nevada laws, funding, what do you see as the most important pending laws or possible issues that are coming forward.
Laurel, go ahead.
You
I'll
look
go
like
ahead.
you've got
I
that one
I
ready.
think the most important thing going forward is Nevada updated our school funding formula at the last, not this last session, but the one before that. And they're still working on how to figure out what adequate funding is. They're working on defining that. But in the interim, about 8 or 9 districts are in what is called a hold harmless pattern, where our funding is frozen, irrespective of what our student population is, at a rate that is lower than we received in 2019. Isn't that correct, Mr. Stokes? And we're looking at, and the districts that are in this hold harmless position are looking at seeing no increasing in funding for what could be a very long time. So to me, the most important critical thing with school funding and that is how do we make some changes to how hold harmless is implemented and how that's affecting the districts, because we've got districts across the state that are going to be very harmed and are already quite harmed by that. Go ahead, Mike.
To add on to that, the School Board Association, we had a discussion about this because it's not only that, but when you really look at this state as a whole, every district, including our largest district, Clark County, is not funded adequately. And so it's kind of become a buzzword, but for the legislature, what does that really mean? And so I think what we really need to do as educational leaders come together in what does adequate funding look like? And not only that, what are some possible sources of revenue? Because somewhere the money's going to have to come. But to do what we want to do for students, what students need to be prepared for their future, is going to take resources. And we're going to have to work with lawmakers to not just say the nice sounding words, but really to have a blueprint of what that looks like, how much, and what we could do with it.
Do you think the state will ever let local boards augment their funding locally?
No.
Not with this new funding formula. Local support has basically been swept into the state pot.
That's unfortunate that you don't have that autonomy.
Yeah, we don't have. I got about 2 or 3 more minutes if you have one other quick question, and then we'll have to stop at 10 o'clock.
Just not a question, just a conclusion. Thank you for allowing me to meet with you today. I appreciate the opportunity, and again, let you know that I chose to apply for this district for a reason. And the reason is that this is an excellent district, and I want to help make it become a superior district. And that I would work with you hand in hand. I care about students. I care about their future. And I want to have an opportunity to build and to help our students succeed, help our teachers succeed, help everyone succeed. And I thank you for that and appreciate your time this morning.
No, on behalf of the board, I would thank you for the interview this morning, the presentation. I thought it was very good. And like I said, if you want a tour, if you get a hold of Mr. Stokes, you guys can work that out this afternoon.
Thank you.
But thank you. And at this time, we'll go into recess until 10:30 for the next interview. Thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome.
special school board meeting. Today's date is February 22nd, 2022. Time is now 10:28 a.m. We're going to continue with our presentations, but before we start our next presentation, which will be conducted by Mr. Andrew Fueling. Mr. Fueling, I know you know the board, but I'm going to go ahead and introduce everybody for the public. I'm Richard Varner, president of the school board for this year. Next to me, to my immediate left, is Laurel Crossman, who's the vice president. Then we have Mrs. Lupe Ramirez, who is the board clerk. And then we have Mr. Don Carini, Mr. Mike Walker, and Stacy Wilkie McCulloch. And then joining us remotely today is Joe Cassiopo. Joe, can you hear us okay? I guess I'll work on that.
have to mute him because on our end, because he was watching the news or something.
Okay, now can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Yeah, sorry about that. I am here.
Not a problem. Thank you. Okay. Just so you know, Mr. Fueling, I'll briefly explain the process today. You'll have up to 90 minutes to make your presentation and answer questions that the board members may have. And then hopefully you'll also have time, if you have any questions, to ask of the board members. And just to remind you that don't think we're being rude if we're looking down, and we'll be taking notes, but we will be listening intently to your presentation. So whenever you're ready, go ahead and start your presentation. Thank you. Sure.
And Trustee Varner, if I could just clarify, so my understanding was the presentation was to be about 30 minutes with then time for questions. Is the 30 minutes, is it a hard 30? Or
No.
Okay,
No, if you,
Thank
if you
you.
go over, you have an hour and a half
okay.
for your presentation. And then we just would like to ask some questions if we have time and allow you time to ask us questions.
I think the presentation will likely go about 35 minutes then, so just so you're aware, there'll be plenty of time
Not a
for
problem. You're not,
questions after.
it's not a hard set.
Okay.
Yeah, we have a hard end time of 12 o'clock.
And
So, Mr. Varner, because we're having technical problems, I might suggest that we don't start his time until, just make sure we give him the full 90 minutes.
That'd be fine. Thank you. Laurel will keep the time.
It might go over the 12, is that okay?
Yeah, I think because of the technical difficulties, it's an unforeseen circumstance, so we can extend it beyond the time a little bit, just to allow the full time.
I might add, just for the members of the public who may be listening to the presentation, it's a little delayed due to technical difficulties. We'll start as soon as those issues have been worked out. Due to technical difficulties, at this time, we'll go into slight recess. Time is 10:35. As soon as the issues have been resolved, we'll reconvene the meeting. February 22nd, 2022. Time is now 10:41. We're going to turn over the microphone, so to speak, to Mr. Andrew Fueling to give his presentation. Whenever you're ready, Mr. Fueling.
Thank you, President Varner. Are you comfortable with me wandering around a bit and not being at the podium? Does that bother any of you? Okay, thank you.
I'm comfortable with it, whatever's best
Okay.
for you.
Okay, thank you. So, thank you so much, all of you, for having me here today. It's truly an honor being considered for this position, and knowing all of you and respecting all of you and respecting the community. I realize the weight that comes with this, so the opportunity is appreciated. Today, the presentation, as I understand it, we're interested in looking at the strategic plan, doing kind of a brief overview and what we understand about it, what we think about it, and then potentially offering some suggestions for improvements. And I'll say that I have many. It's something that it's one of those things where once you get going, you start seeing more and more. So it starts to build. And so it was really an interesting process. And I hope that I've laid it out in a way, and I provided the presentations because it does jump a bit. And there are some really significant changes that I'm offering for suggestions. But hopefully by having that, and as we go through, you'll be able to refer back and forth. So please, at any time, as long as we don't have that hard 30 minutes, if you have any questions along the way, please feel free to stop me. So to start with a quote, and I would be remiss if I didn't try to drag in the state of Wisconsin in some way. Perfection is not attainable, but if we chase perfection, we can catch excellence. Vince Lombardi was a coach for the Green Bay Packers back in the 1950s and 1960s, and incredibly successful. Won 7 championships, 5 NFL championships, the first 2 Super Bowls. So it's someone who knows a lot about excellence and about the chase of perfection along the way. And I think what is really important, just in the bigger scheme of things, what the strategic plan is, it is a really, really all-encompassing document of what we want for our community, what we want for our parents, and ultimately, most importantly, what we want for our kids. There is a lot there. And when we set goals, sometimes we don't meet those goals. But the most important part is that we are improving and we are moving toward them. So when a district does this sort of thing, or any entity does this sort of thing, the idea, the goal is you want to get there. But I think what is really important is that you're not always going to hit every single thing perfectly every single time. There are limitations along the way that will come up. You can get sidetracked. COVID can happen, right? So, but having the long run view, and that's going to be a theme of this presentation, is having a long run view of what we're trying to do. The path towards catching excellence is still one that we want to follow. And that ultimately is a big part of what we're trying to do here. So highlights of the presentation first. Within the strategic plan document, you have a vision statement, you have a mission statement, you have beliefs and values, and you have your goals. What is really important about that, and just to take kind of it'll be a quick look at it, is do those align? So it's one thing to have a vision statement or to have goals, but then your beliefs and values do not support those goals or that vision statement or that mission statement. So having alignment along there, and I'll say it is well aligned ultimately, but that is a critical piece. If there is a belief or value in the strategic plan document, there's a block of belief and value statements. If somehow one of those wasn't represented in the goal or ultimately in the vision statement and what we're trying to do, that would be a problem. That would be something to address. Then looking at what the overall values represented are, when you take a look at all of those pieces and say, so when it comes down to what is this about? And just to take a moment to talk about that, because I think that's really important for you all and us as a community to understand. Then some kind of overarching larger considerations when looking to strengthen the strategic plan. That will be, I think, enlightening, and I think it will help the conversation for then getting into some of the specifics as we go through them. And also, I think some of the limitations that currently we face with how much we can strengthen it. Ultimately, this is a process that will take time. And just, I guess, recognizing that. After that, some specific considerations for modifications. So I went through the entire document, and what you'll see if you're skipping ahead at all is everything highlighted in maroon is effectively a change. And there are some really significant changes. In the end, consolidating some goals, creating an entirely new goal, creating a new objective, and some other strategies along the way. And I'll try to walk you through that process. Well, I guess the thought process as to why I've done that and why I'm suggesting that this would be considered. And then in the end, and I think we all recognize the importance of being able to measure this and see, are we achieving what we want to achieve? And I think the reality is, early on, I was trying to go through and identify what are the benchmarks, what would these metrics be? But identifying metrics or identifying benchmarks has to happen before we start looking towards what do we want to see for improvement. If we don't know where we're starting, saying what kind of improvement we want to see may or may not actually be possible or make sense. And I'll give you an example of that a little later. So I'm not going to read through the current vision, mission, and goals, but this was just a little exercise, and I'll use goal 1 at the bottom as an example. So again, in our strategic plan document, there is a block of values and belief statements that were made by the community when this all came about some 10 years ago. And it's important that they then support those belief statements and values support the goals. And so what I did is lay out the goals, and I'll go through the others, but just laid out which of those belief and value statements naturally align with those goals. And to me, that says if every belief and value statement is represented under those goals, then clearly you have an aligned strategic plan. So with exceptional staff, you have a belief statement that supports that. When you get into goal 2, you have 3 different parts of your belief statements that support that. With goal 3, you'll notice that there's a slightly different color text, and that's purposeful. So one of the things you'll note, and I'll jump ahead because it'll probably make more sense, is that when you get to goal 5, the belief and value statements that are listed there, they're the exact same, okay? So, and when you look, especially when you look at goal 3, engaged parents and families, if you really read through that, community comes up over and over and over again. So not only do you have a separate goal for the community piece, but you have a separate goal for the engaged parents and families piece, and ultimately I think the goals and ideals within them are very similar. So then what comes out of this, and what bottom line within this document, what do we see? And clearly, what do we value? So we value our students, we value them now, we value them in the future. We value them when they're on campus, we value them when they're off campus. And we don't believe that standardized tests are the single determining factor of achievement for our kids. There clearly is a recognition that there is a whole child that we are talking about, and that standardized test may be one small piece ultimately of defining achievement and growth and success for those students. We value our staff, so respect for staff and recognizing their self-efficacy, so the feeling that they're being successful and they're kind of recognizing that they're a part, they're making that success happen. That is a big piece to student success and opportunities. We value our partnerships. Clearly within this document, parents in the community are incredibly important, and again, a key with student success and opportunity. And we value our country's future. And so one of the, in preparing for this, looking at strategic plan documents from across the country with districts that are known to be successful districts. And what's interesting is, while a lot of these things I would say are true and they are very clearly delineated in their strategic plan documents, that bottom part is not. That doesn't always come up. It's there here and there. But one of the value statements for this district talks about the importance of what we are doing for our country's future. To move our community and nation forward, students must receive a world-class education. So I think what I like about that is it sets us apart in some ways, and clearly the community values this greater goal of what we are trying to do for our kids and what we are trying to do for our country. So an overall look, then now getting into some of the suggested modifications to the plan. There clearly is room for improvement, and there always will be. That's the nature of change in our society and the expectations of the economy. I would argue there's actually one really glaring omission, and I'll get to that, and that adds an entire new goal to the strategic plan itself. There is a lot of use of the word empower. Empower is a great word, and it's an important word. However, I would say there are places in the document, within the goals, within the objectives, within the strategies, that I believe we should offer some more commitment. They need to be more committal. And that's where using the word ensure rather than empower, saying that this is going to happen, not that just the stage has been set and the opportunity is there, but there are some things that I think, for the benefit of our students, that it should just be an expectation that this is happening. I think I mentioned this earlier. While the need for metrics is obvious, without having current benchmarks, how achievable goals that we set cannot be determined. And so the example I'll use, if we say we want a 10% increase in parent engagement in our district. So we come up with the metric. What are we going to use to gauge this 10% increase? And if we then go through the process of collecting that data and we say, okay, our parent engagement currently is at 95%. 95% of our parents are engaged. And that'd be a wonderful place to be. But if you're at 95%, right now saying we want to increase parent engagement by 10% doesn't make any sense, right? Because we're already at 95%. You can't increase that by 10%. So it really, I think, just solidifies the importance of getting to the point where we have established these benchmarks across the board, and they're very visible and known. So setting those benchmarks is critical for us to move forward, gauge progress, but I think they also need to be realistic when you're considering about collecting these. It is possible that I would think it's really important to know how a student is performing under all sorts of various circumstances, and maybe it's when there's a full moon on those days, what does the performance look like, right? Trying to collect that data would be incredibly burdensome and incredibly cumbersome, trying to make sense of that. And so we have to keep in mind with those benchmarks when we create them, those metrics, that it's realistic in terms of collection. Once we do recognize what those are, streamlining the process of collection and trying to make it as easy as possible. If we are going to make them useful, it has to be accessible. And so those metrics, they need to have purpose, they need to be meaningful, they need to be accessible. One of the things I've learned in my job over the past, doing this job, I guess over 11 years ultimately, is that there are a lot of people who are not very comfortable with numbers. It's just reality. So one of the things I've tried to do in my job, and I know we try to do as a district, is try to provide visuals of all these things so it's easy to compare and easy to understand. So I think that would likely be a large part of this, especially in reporting back to you. And they have to be actionable, and actionable is a word that's thrown around that I don't like that word because I think it's overused, but I think it's really appropriate here in that when you're looking at metrics, so the example being English learners and transiency. So if we are identifying metrics that are gauging how successful we are with English learners, a likely outcome is that we are going to try to do more or do things different to support our English learners. That is something we can do something about. That is something we have control over. So you look at transiency. So transiency, and actually I picked these two, so English learners and transiency being students moving between schools or moving between homes, they have an equal negative effect on the ability on student achievement. There are also two things that in Nevada, and even really Carson City, we are more than double the national average on both of these items. So they have some similarities. Transiency then, while having a strong negative effect on achievement, is not something that we can do a whole lot about. We can try to provide support for families. We can try to make them want to stay. But ultimately, if families decide to move, Nevada by far is the most transient state in the country. In 2021, on the state report card, we were 24.5% of our students were considered transient, something along those lines. So I don't know the exact definition and what all the little pieces are that allow a student to be considered transient, but it's really high. And in the state of Nevada, we average over 20% across the state. And again, that is well more than twice the national average. So I do have a really long list of suggested metrics that I've come up with. Those are at the end of the presentation. I do not plan on presenting those. There's no way I would have time to get through that, but I thought it would at least be a reference point, and maybe you'd want to refer to it. Other considerations? I believe, as a guy who believes in markets and the power of markets, that incentives are critical to success in any organization and in the economy. And so making sure that whatever we do, that the incentives are aligned is critical to moving us forward. And we often think of the public sector and private sector as being different because we have different goals. We're not motivated by profit, but ultimately humans are humans, and incentives are critical to us kind of moving things in a desired direction. And if you can do that, that will bring you the buy-in, I believe, at all levels. Everything will align and everyone will do kind of what we need to do to get students where we want. I have this little phrase here, long-term greedy. So you may have heard of a company named Goldman Sachs. Goldman Sachs is an enormous financial services firm, investment institution. And up through the 1970s, this was the mantra of Goldman Sachs. It was about being long-term greedy. And again, I said one of the themes of this presentation is we need to be thinking about the long term in our decisions and what we are doing. But being greedy for student achievement ultimately is along the way, right? Getting greedy towards the vision statement is what we want. But that long-term idea, which Wall Street, once the 1980s hit, they kind of lost track of, and now it's about every single quarter. And what are my earnings per quarter? And I think that really has started to permeate society, and we expect results so quickly. And I don't think that's realistic for what we want and to get our kids where we want them to be. Then something that I call a pre-mortem analysis, and it's something that I've done for a long time, just when bringing in an initiative or trying something new just within my department or even just for myself. You're familiar with the term postmortem. So kind of after the fact, what caused the problem? What caused the death? And here it's just taking a step back before you implement, say, what might be a problem for us down the road? What might cause this to fail before you actually get there? And so what's really important is that if you want this strategic plan to happen, if you want it to be implemented with fidelity, you clearly have to have value in it, and you have to hold the superintendent accountable for it. It has to be in the evaluation. It has to be a part of ongoing conversations. I should be reporting to you. I have biannually about it. I think currently in the document, there's talking about a quarterly report, and I think we make that more as a part of the community PLCs. But there has to be some other, I think, some expectation with that built into the evaluation process. Community must continue to support the plan. If the community no longer supports the plan that they were a huge part of, it is going to fail. Ultimately, it has to represent the values of the community. Truly, the world that we are in right now, and it's not just us, we know this is a national phenomenon. The staffing shortages we are seeing that is impairing every entity in the entire country. And realistically, while I don't think it makes the plan fail, it does impair our ability to move toward meeting the goals of that plan. We are a service industry that is very staff intensive, and we need people to do this work. And lastly, members of the school community must treat each other with empathy, mutual respect, and presume positive intentions. It has been, as you know, a long, tumultuous 2-year road that we have been on. And there are pieces within my recommendations and in some of the strategies. In my original interview, I talked about what I think is the importance of volunteering and getting people in the schools, and I expand a little bit upon that. But that, I think, can build when we start getting down the line of getting our folks in the community and our parents back in the schools. And I would argue even then getting our students out into the community and providing service in the community. So with goal setting, and I only bring this up because I'm adding a goal, and our goals aren't necessarily, you have this idea of SMART goals, and this is used and talked about all the time. Smarter goals, and I didn't come up with this. This is something I think I learned in business classes years ago, but the idea of not only what matters when you're setting a goal, but ultimately then what matters in the process of keeping it viable. And so adding the E and the R at the end, you're evaluating, once you've gone through this goal, you're evaluating, does this goal still work for us? What kind of data are we getting back? And then reviewing, you're really considering, does this need to be modified? Is this still viable for us? And so I think making sure that as much as possible, our goals here are smarter, if you want to use that term. That sort of setup will allow us to have that focus on continuous improvement. It allows us to look at programs and decide, is this something that we still want? Is it successful or is it obsolete? Is it something that has kind of passed its time? But it helps us continue with that long run mentality with all that we do. So now getting into more specifics, the vision statement. So the vision statement, this is your desired future state. This is where you want to be. This is the beacon, the charge, the call that you expect your community, you expect your parents, you expect your families, and to some extent students. I don't think we often talk to them about our vision statement, but this is where we want them to go. And this, Simon Sinek is the author. He wrote a book called Start With Why that was really popular, I guess, 8 to 10 years ago. I guess I don't know exactly how old it is. But the one piece, and he says it over and over and over again in the book, but it's a really good book, is that people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And so your vision statement should not be about, here's exactly what we're gonna do, but it's about the why. And at least, if anything, I think generating some type of emotional connection to it about, where do we wanna be and why do we wanna get there? And so one of the first suggestions I would have in considering our vision statement, our community inspires and empowers innovators, leaders, and thinkers, is that I believe in education in general, and I believe in Carson City. We have talked, you have heard the term student-centered or learner-centered over and over and over. I mean, this is to our core what we are trying to do. This is what gives us direction. Are we making decisions based on what is best for students? I would argue that our current vision statement, because it includes the our community piece, and it's clearly not because the community is not important, comes up in the mission statement, it comes up over and over again throughout goals and strategies. But if there is one thing that drives us, I don't think having the community piece of that is really the appropriate spot for it. And so what I offer is a suggestion, and this isn't, I don't know, I think anything earth-shattering, but what is important about this statement is that I believe it is student-centered. So all students owning their educational journey, graduating ready to innovate and lead, and inspired to elevate to the next step on their path. I really like the word own, and it's something that in the world of leadership, it seems more and more there's focus on this idea of ownership. And if you're trying to make things happen, you have to own your process and own what you are trying to do. And here, I think it's really important. We talk about students taking responsibility for their education. They should be owning their educational journey. That is something I know all of our teachers try to build in our students. So then breaking this statement down, all students, so there's no exceptions. Education is not a passive endeavor for the student because they must own it. It has to be an active one. 100% of students graduate. We're saying all students graduating ready to innovate and lead. That may seem like a very audacious goal. It is the only districts I know of that actually graduate 100% of their students usually have senior classes of like 20 kids. It's very, very small. But if you are going to have any audacious goal in this document, what better one than this? I mean, ultimately, this is what we want to see. So I think that's a good place. And within a vision statement, if that's where we really want to get to, I think that's where you'd put it. Students prepared for the post-secondary world and students inspired to ascend at any point in the journey. The mission statement, I think the mission statement is actually really good. It tells you the what and the how, and that's what mission statements are supposed to do. It supports the vision. That's what it's supposed to do. So I don't actually have any suggestions to modify that. Okay, so now getting into the goals. There are some significant changes. So if you remember goal 3 and goal 5, the value statements that support them are the exact same. And I think it is reasonable and it actually works well to combine those into goal 1. You don't have to eliminate anything from them, but it's simply an idea of having this goal about parents and community, your external stakeholders, somehow being engaged in the process. So again, it's not reflective of the importance, but that there is that similarity. And so what I've done in this document and in this presentation is taken the pieces of goal 5 and brought them under goal 3. They're now titled goal 3, and goal 3 is engaged parents, families, and community. But the objectives that were from goal 5 are still labeled 5.1, 5.2, just so I was hoping that would be a way to make it make sense for you. There's a new goal 5, sustainable student success. And this to me is the huge kind of obvious place where I think there should be some accountability for what we are doing. And this is simply a statement about the long run for our district and what we are trying to do and not being short-sighted in decisions that we're making. And we'll get into the details of that. Goal 2, add an objective related to curricular, co-curricular, and extracurricular opportunities. I feel those are very important to our students and their success and their growth. Strategies, new strategies under objectives 2.1 and 2.2 related to curriculum alignment and early literacy. Goal 1, this The changes here are reflective of the times we are in. And goal 1 is about exceptional staff, and clearly staffing, again, not just us, nationwide, is an issue. So in the December jobs report that the feds put out every month, there were 10.9 million jobs that were vacant in America. And for a long time, or I should say for a long time, early on, this has been happening for a while. And the comment was, well, you know, there's all this extra money going towards unemployment and people don't have an incentive to get back to work, and that's what's causing all the problems. Well, that's gone away, and still in December, we have 10.9 million vacant jobs. There are 6.4 million people in America claiming unemployment in the whole country. If every single person who is on unemployment went back to work, I still have 4.5 million jobs that need to be filled. So this is a much larger problem than us, but clearly we are gonna need to get creative and reevaluate our processes and our expectations when we are talking about staffing. Under Goal 3, new strategies under Objectives 3.2 and 5.2, related to student service and volunteers, I mentioned a little bit about that. And then under Goal 4, a new strategy, just kind of indicating a concern and that we want to make some progress and support on mental health in the district. We know that mental health concerns have really bubbled up over the last decade, and through these last 2 years, it's maybe even been more significant. Northern Nevada, well, I guess I don't know about Southern Nevada, but Northern Nevada is often referred to as a mental health desert. I mean, I would argue healthcare in general, there's just not enough providers to do all these services that we need. And so I guess just recognizing that this is an issue so that it's on our radar to potentially provide support. So I'm not going to read through all of these. The only pieces, I'm gonna do this in order, but the only pieces I'm gonna mention specifically are the changes in strategies or objectives or in the new goal. So I'm not gonna go through every other little detail that I make modifications to, but you have that in your packets if you care to refer back to it or ask questions. So under exceptional staff, we are looking for ways to incentivize hard to fill positions. There are many of them. There are some that are classic ones like special education teachers, but I think really a hard look at what we do to bring those people in and maybe some extra things we need to do is really worth our time. Review our current practices that may limit pools of candidates for positions. So there are practices that we've had in place for a very long time. And some of them, many of them, and this is for any entity, a lot of the practices that you're gonna have for hiring are gonna reflect maybe 10 or 20 years ago. 10 or 20 years ago, there wasn't a problem hiring for positions like there is now. When I applied for my first teaching job in Monroe, Wisconsin, which is the cheese capital of the world, as I remember, their high school mascot is the cheesemaker, actually. So when I applied for my first job, it's in the middle of nowhere, rural southwestern Wisconsin. I got a letter back. I didn't get the job. I probably shouldn't tell you that considering the circumstances we're in here. But I got a letter saying, thank you for applying. You were one of 155 candidates that applied for this job, for a teaching job in rural Wisconsin. So that is clearly not where we are now. So looking at that, I think, is important. And then we talk about conducting exit interviews, and I think it's important for us in order to glean some really useful information to have entrance interviews. So when people come into our district, why are they coming to our district? And you can look at that as, you know, if you have someone who's local in Carson City, what is drawing them? And if you have someone who is not from Carson City, but maybe from a surrounding area, maybe from a surrounding district, what drew them into the district? You will have applicants from different generations. I think that's worth disaggregating that information. And why is it that someone who maybe is in a second career or someone who's brand spanking new at 20 years old wants to come to our district? Because that will allow us, when we go through our recruiting and do our marketing, to, I think, really make more more directed marketing to those people as far as why these certain groups of people might want to come to the district. So it'll just give us some really good information. Exceptional staff. Same goal, but under the strategy is the idea is about homegrown staff. And while I know the district, there are I don't know if it's an organized effort really to try to bring people in from the classified staff and offer opportunities to move up to become teachers. That is something that we should be marketing even before people come to the district. That is something that should be out there. This is something that we support. This is something you can do if you want to get to this. If you would love to become a teacher, we can help you get there. And even internally, that probably needs to be marketed more loudly. Intentionally identifying instructional and departmental leaders for our future. So clearly we have a shortage in classified staff across the country, certified staff across the country, but we also need good leadership and really being intentional with identifying those people that we think may have the capacity, may have the talent, may have the aspirations to do that. And if they don't, ultimately down the road, that's fine. But I think being intentional about that and identifying those people and trying to offer support and have conversations would be beneficial. No suggestions on this one. Somewhat related to the last one, developing administrators and directors as effective leaders of programs and of their local human resources needs. So making sure that leaders at the schools, in the departments themselves, are familiar enough with human resources processes and strategies and ways of dealing with people that minimize maybe larger concerns down the road. I think that's time well invested in our folks. Here there's quite a bit. So we're talking about retention. And we're talking about morale. So one of the things that generally gives people a positive feeling about what they do is knowing that they are good at it, they're successful, what they're doing is effective, and they feel like it's making a difference. And that is something in educational research shows a positive correlation with student achievement. Something with even greater correlation is group efficacy. So I believe that in my school, everything that we are doing, we are all very effective, we are all successful, and we're doing it as a team. That has even a greater size effect on outcomes for kids. So doing that, but then recognizing those successes is a key piece to, I think, retaining staff. Building emotional capacity in staff and offering our employee assistance programs. You know, I think life is complicated and life is hard, and the last 2 years has been that in spades. And so I think recognizing that the times we are in are difficult and that we need to offer support to our staff to help them work through problems, difficulties in their own lives and maybe at work, but build that emotional capacity for them to be able to deal with all of this and continue on the path towards offering great instruction to our students. Building community partnerships to support recognizing outstanding staff accomplishments. I think, again, given the last 2 years, if we have staff that are doing amazing things and our people out in the community that are engaged with us are recognizing them in some way, shape, or form, and it builds that connection, I think that's critical for our staff. Review and improve current exit interview process. So we do have an exit interview process, but actually really taking a look at it and how we gather information and what we're asking, doing our best to learn about why people leave and how maybe we can prevent that. And then workplace satisfaction surveys. Again, just trying to gather as much information as we can about where we are with current staff. You have the entrance, the exit, but the current is an important place to be to try to prevent folks leaving. Under curriculum that matters, the only strategy I added, and this is heavy on curriculum, but one of the pieces that is really important, and it's something that we've been moving down the road to for quite some time with this alignment of our curriculum. But I think special attention has to be given to not only that we have curriculum aligned to the Nevada academic standards, but that curriculum is vertically aligned, K through 12. It's horizontally aligned, so we don't have teachers spending time teaching redundant standards that otherwise might give them more time if they weren't. and then that our assessments are aligned to those standards, and that our grading system makes sense and is aligned to how we do assessments and how we are gauging the success. And that is a really big, we have moved down this path, but I think there is clearly some ways to go with trying to have this coherent system all the way through that makes sense to us. Goal or strategy 2.2.4, continue to provide support for early literacy goals for all elementary schools. This is something that has already been happening in schools across the country and in Carson City, but it's not recognized specifically here, but I think it's really important. We know there's been a lot of research about the importance of kids reading at or above grade level by third grade and really anywhere within elementary school. So I think it's worthwhile to have that laid out as a strategy. No suggestions there. So this is an entirely new objective under the curriculum that matters. Enhance student learning, creativity, social skills, and health. I would even offer leadership abilities through curricular, co-curricular, and extracurricular opportunities with attention to student interests. I am not artistically talented in any way, shape, or form, but I really believe in the arts. And I believe that it does a lot for kids, that creativity piece can carry over into so many different domains. And I think that's a critical thing for us to continue the support we have. That is unique. Many districts across the country are cutting those types of programs, and I don't believe that's really where we would want to go. And then co-curricular and extracurricular clubs and activities. We have a lot of this in Carson City. However, I think it's important enough to mention for students who may not fully buy into the vision of owning their education, this can be an important piece to keep them on the right path, where then somewhere down the line, they get it and they're a part of it. So I think that's an important thing to recognize. And then looking to maximize participation and eliminate barriers to participation. This is something, something as simple as transportation, after-school transportation to and from. Some kids may not be able to participate because they don't have a ride. And are there things like that that we can do to support? So the only reason these have any red in them is because this is the amalgamation here of goal 5, and goal 3 into one. So engage parents, families, and community. Just a slight change in the kind of the wording of the full goal itself, but I won't go through that here at the moment. This is where the emphasis on volunteerism comes in. So as a part of this, parents and community strategy 3.2.4 will have regular opportunities to volunteer in the schools, and volunteers will be celebrated and recognized. I think all of our schools, when they've had volunteers, they do what they can to recognize, but I really feel, given the past 2 years and where we have been, this is so critical for our schools, for our community, to get people in the schools, whether they have kids in the school or not, but being a part of this so they can go into our schools and see the amazing things that are happening every day. And they can empathize with some of the struggles that we have. Education is not an easy business. And I think having this happen helps people understand that. Strategy 5.2.2. So again, this was initially under goal 5, but I'm creating this new strategy and moving it under goal 3, engaging with the community to create a base of volunteer service opportunities for our students and consider as a potential graduation requirement. There are many districts around the country that do require volunteer service in their community as a graduation requirement. I don't know where we are with something like that in our district, but I think it is at least worth considering. If anything, the fact that we have established community agencies, businesses, civic organizations that our students can go and volunteer with, and getting them out there, I think is worthwhile. Under goal 4, strategy 4.1.2 is added, and just adding the addition to the objective, mental wellness, mental health. Again, considering the times we were in, I think this is an important adjustment. And then goal 6, sustainable student success. supporting students now and in the future by optimizing our resource decisions for the long run. Objective 6.1 is mostly about looking for cost efficiencies. What can we do to try to find efficiencies that we can then redirect resources to better support kids? It would be something that would be reviewed on a regular basis with schools and departments. You never know where unique ideas are going to come from. Identify the priorities of where we would put that money. Some things we've already done here: continue to be a national leader in the use of renewable energy and energy savings and maintenance projects. I think we've talked about this, but quite literally, Carson is a national leader in this area. And that is something, not only is it good for saving money and being able to reallocate it, it's a good niche for us, otherwise just marketing and advertising ourselves. Within the classrooms, integrating sustainability projects, potentially to have cost savings or cost neutral opportunities identified by students. I think there is a huge opportunity there. Kids can be very creative and can ask some really tough and good questions. And so there may be opportunities. I think that'd be a really cool thing to celebrate if students came up with some different ideas for us. And then establish or implement nationally recognized efficiency and or quality metrics for operational activities. And again, this is because it goes back to the benchmarking piece. 6.2, planning for all district operations has a long-term focus. So we have a long-term financial plan. We have a long-term concern about the safety of our students and the safety of our infrastructure within the district. We have the opportunity to go after grants. One of the key things with grants is that while money is good, there's always strings attached. And we want to make sure that when we apply for local grants, apply for state grants, apply for federal grants, that they align with our goals and our vision. We're not just going after every pot of money that is out there. That becomes inefficient in itself. And then advocating at the government level, local, state, and federal. This is not something currently mentioned in our strategic plan. I have experiences over the last years here where it is clear how important this is. And if you're talking about the long run, that has to be a part of it. That has to be a really big part of it. Carson City, clearly we don't have a large representation. We don't have the number of legislators as Clark or Washoe, and Nevada doesn't have the population to have a lot of representation necessarily at the federal level, but at least getting the word out and building relationships to try to move those things is good for us and good for students moving forward. The last piece, healthy and safe physical environments for students indoors and outdoors. And again, just thinking of the long run, we want students to be healthy, we want students to be safe, looking at indoor air quality, the types of chemicals we use, the products we use to clean our schools, how well we maintain the outdoor spaces so that they are safe for students. I believe that having students participate and be responsible for portions of cleaning, even if it's just in their classroom, which I know a lot of elementary teachers do for sure, is really important to that ownership piece, not only of the educational journey, but of the school itself. And so looking to maybe build upon that and try to celebrate that, I think would be a worthwhile endeavor for us. And creating opportunities for teachers to use our buildings, grounds, and facilities as a 3D textbook or classroom. So we have all these safe spaces we have created. Let's utilize that for instructional purposes. That would be of great benefit. I think not only for our teachers, because even as a teacher, I never went into the boiler room of the school that I taught at, and that's kind of this secret, dark, and interesting place that I never had an opportunity to see. But then bringing the students in and seeing what kind of questions they generate, I think would support a lot of what we're trying to do here. So in the end, what do we want? I think it's this. Classrooms, schools, and a district that students, staff, and parents and community run toward because they want to be a part of the everyday awesome. One of the comments I've heard over the years is, people, kind of questioning what's happening in America and concern about, economically and are things still good here? And I know some financial commentator at some point made the comment, look, do people still want to come here? Yeah, we're doing okay, right? For all the tumultuous times and the tensions, we're still doing okay. People want to come here. This is a great place to be. I view what we want for the district to be in the same way. We want people coming to us. And then every student had the support they needed to meet the vision statement upon graduation. You drop in on the cover of our strategic plan a picture of the cutest little girl on the globe. And at this time, this is 2015, 2016 likely when this picture was taken, she's now probably 7th, 8th, 9th grade. I would love to know where she is. And the obligation we have, not only for her, but for her friends and her friends' friends and their parents and our community, knowing that she and all of them are moving in this direction, I think is, in the end, what we want. To be a beacon for all that is right in education, I'll tell you now, I know in Carson City, many districts come to us to find out what is happening, what we're doing. They like the way we do things. We led the way truly with this whole student-centered model. And that should continue and it should grow. And then simply to be humble enough to know that we can always improve, but have the fire inside us to do it. It's one thing to know you can improve, and it's another to make the steps happen to get there. And I think that ultimately gets back to what the goal of the strategic plan is, and then building those metrics and benchmarks for us to gauge how successful we are. That is the end of my presentation. Again, at the end, I have piles and piles and piles and piles of benchmarks. And it's really just a starting point, and clearly there might be many that are better than what I have listed, so I'm not going to go through those. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Fueling. Good presentation. I'll go ahead and open it up for questions from the board members at this time. Any questions? Stacy?
Well, one concern is you don't have any principal experience, and you are the person who evaluates principals. So how do you see your role, and how do you think you can do that without having a background in it?
So I think that goes back to looking at the practices and processes within the district. So for a very long time, there was a team of folks who would evaluate principals. I don't believe from the standpoint of managing and running an educational building that I should be the one. If I'm involved in the process, I'm not the only one involved in the process. One of the keys, I think, to being a leader is understanding that you need to put really good people around you, really smart people. And there are people likely that would be better suited to directly evaluate principals, like your education services director, who ultimately is guiding the entire instructional process for them. I think that would be a better road to go down if you're speaking specifically about instruction. If you're getting into the larger idea of management and that side of it, clearly I could be a part of that. But I think you have to utilize, every situation is different. Everybody brings different talents. So you just have to make sure that you are using the resources you have around you to make sure that all of your staff ultimately are being held accountable for what they do, and that those who are evaluating them know what they should be seeing if it's being successful and good.
Laurel?
I'm just going to ask this question. Have you ever received a letter of admonition or been disciplined by an employer?
I have never received a letter of admonition or ever been disciplined by any employer.
Any other questions from the board members now? You have one? Joe, do you have any questions? Joe, can you hear us?
I can. Can you hear me?
We can now. Do you have any
Okay,
questions?
thanks. The little unmute button is very small. Yeah, Julie, I've brought this up a few times, but your understanding of our district and where we're at with our current reading and math proficiency and high school ACT scores, I think, one, there's a lot of celebrations we can have, but the reality is our numbers, I think we'd always want to find ways to improve things, or at least recognize that maybe where we're at is where we need to be. And I'm wondering what your take on that is, and how would you get there? What would you see as maybe some shorter and longer term goals, meaning a year out to 3 to 5 years, in terms of, let's say, reading and math proficiency and ACT scores? And how would we accomplish it? And how would we do this in a way that we aren't putting any undue burden, say, on the teachers of the sites, given the fact that we do have a work fatigue issue, as most places do, going on?
Oops. Thank you, President Casiopo. I guess first, I would argue that if you are following and moving towards the goals of the strategic plan overall with fidelity, you will see that growth over time. If you are holding the superintendent accountable, we're regularly talking about it, I feel like a lot of these metrics, these goals that lie within the strategic plan, we should be having discussions about this on a regular basis. We should be discussing student data on a regular basis. And if you are having those conversations, at least there to start, I think it kind of opens up then, what else do we need to do? I would say that adding a long run view to what we are doing. So truly, I believe, and I'll offer this as a prediction, our scores will go up next year from where they are this year on all accounts. That's a short run answer. And I think what we're looking for is in the long run. We want to see this growth to continue to happen over time. If you want this kind of growth to continue to happen over time, you have to look at, if you are looking specifically at the tests themselves and you want to improve the outcomes on those tests, they're very academically focused. They're very aligned with the state standards for all of our curricular areas. If we are moving kids towards meeting mastery of those standards, by definition, those scores in all of those other areas should go up. And then it's kind of like, really, it's like being a teacher. You have this standard, you have this expectation of where you want to be, and you're backwards planning from there to try to get to it. What do you need to do to get to it? So when talking about that alignment piece, the strategy 2 something that I added in there talking about curricular alignment. So if we know that these standards that the state has set are supposed to get us to show or would represent mastery, that should drive increases in all of those scores. If we know that the curriculum then we are offering at the schools is aligned to those standards, then we know that everything are generally within the domain of those standards should be covered. If we have assessments that are aligned to those curricular goals and our grading, I think as far as feedback for students aligns in that entire process, we should have students being able to understand what their grading really means. When a student has an 88% and they really want an A, and they go to a teacher and they say, how can I get 2 more percent? That is not, that to me says that there is not a meaningful relationship to what grades mean and what is actually being learned. The conversation should be, how do I show you that I have the level of understanding and mastery of these concepts so that I can get this better grade, that you can show, that you can I can represent to you that I understand this. And so that having that alignment along the way and really, I think, taking a hard look at our grading system then built within those or related to those assessments will help move us down that path. What I don't believe is that it's about, I talked about reallocating resources. If you can drive efficiencies and reallocate resources to support kids, if you can free up resources that don't impair the quality of the programs that we offer otherwise, and we can use those to support kids to meet these goals, that's outstanding. If we can do wraparound programs and after-school programs, all these co-curricular things, and I would offer that the added strategy or objective related to co-curricular programs would support this as well. That, I think, is okay. What we don't want to go down a road of is eliminating offerings and programs and things within our schools so that we can allocate more and more and more time to math or more time necessarily to reading. We're talking about a whole child. There are a lot of things that are really important to the development of our children. And just simply reallocating time, if we reallocated an hour of every day at the expense of science instruction to support mathematics, and our math scores bumped up slightly, the question I would ask you, is that a win? Our standardized test scores, which are a snapshot of a day in time, going up a little bit, I would be happy to see them go up, but we have given up an incredible item to get there. So when you talk about the time efficiency piece, I think that goes back to the planning piece and the curricular alignment. If you're eliminating redundancies with maybe teachers in different areas teaching the same standards, which doesn't necessarily, that shouldn't really be happening, that should free up more time for teachers to be able to focus on what they need to know. One of the items that has come up recently that I've been introduced to is something called proficiency scales. And it's something that we're going to hear more and more about, but it's really laying out really clearly for teachers. If there's something as a teacher that I had, I would have been so incredibly thankful. It lays out exactly what are the expectations for kids that they're showing their levels of mastery and different levels of mastery. And you talk about what it takes to differentiate. Well, depending on where a kid is, you can go back down to some of these lower expectations and make sure that they are there, that they have that mastery at that level to move up to the next. You talk about rigor, and you have kind of this ultimate level of mastery that kids can show. So having that differentiation of instruction, having rigor in the classrooms, that will ultimately support this as well.
AJ, could I, one of the things that, most things Joe and I agree on, and then one of the areas that I think sometimes we get too focused on is standardized tests. And I made a similar comment at a state board meeting where it is a necessary component of student achievement, but it's one small piece. And so all of these things you're talking about as a superintendent, how are you going to help this district, the school board, get beyond looking at the simple metric of an SBAC score and an ACT score and really look at multiple measures of success for students?
So the first thing I would do is share with you all, and I may do this regardless of what happens here today, a book that I read in the past couple of months called The Testing Charade. And what this does, this is an author that knows a whole lot about testing and what it means and looks at it in terms of K-12 education and what we're so focused on with standardized tests, and really calls into question to what benefit, if we are using it as, if you go back to, how many of you took the Iowa Basic Skills Test when you were in school? Maybe that wasn't a Nevada thing, sorry. So at least in the Midwest, this was a big deal. So the Iowa Basic Skills Test, it was basically the original kind of standardized test. And a gentleman, I believe it was at the University of Iowa, I can't think of his name right now, he developed the test. And one of the things that he said early on, and so the purpose of the test was simply to say, have the kids take this and use this information to see where they need help and where they need support. Simple as that. And one of his comments was, that type of test should never be used to evaluate teachers or evaluate educational success, right? It's just about using it to understand where students are and use that information to keep the process going and keep improvement going. I think the focus on just understand, like, it's hard because we don't have a lot of control over it or any control, right? We have to do these things. It represents our schools on their report card. So there is importance to it. And I truly believe there is valuable information there. But again, and I think I said this during the interview, when you look at, say, the ACT, right, we are using that as our gauge for college and career ready. You have universities across the country that are no longer looking at ACT or SAT scores because it is not a holistic view of the child. And so, Trustee Walker, I think exactly what you're saying. I don't think it's an overnight shift, and ultimately we don't have a whole lot of control over that because it's state driven. But I think it's at least worth continuing the conversation so that everybody understands that there is importance to it, but we have to look at how it's being used and how we interpret that information. It's easy to go to because it's a quick number that the state can throw into reports. And we so badly, I think in education, we so badly want these metrics that we can just go to and say that, yes, this is successful and yes, this works. The reality as well then is when you have all these standardized test scores, when there's analysis at the national level about how much success have we had based on these scores, they don't actually use those scores. They have to normalize them against NAEP scores in each state because the NAEP is national, international assessment. So one of the things that you'll see, say in the example I'll use is from New York. New York over time was showing growth in their standardized test scores in the state, yet their NAEP scores were flatlining and actually going down. So what does that tell you? Well, we're schools and districts learning how to better teach kids to take tests like this? Were those tests over time maybe being dumbed down so that we could have higher scores coming out? I mean, I don't know exactly what happened, but those NAEP scores at the international level are considered kind of the gold standard, and they're not tests that can be prepared for. So it really is something when you're looking comparisons between countries. And I think just coming back to the question, trying to understand the importance of this as a metric and moving us forward, I think it has importance. We can't get away from it having importance to the state at this time, but I think the importance is, as you stated, Mr. Walker, it is a fraction of this larger picture that we're trying to show. So it's something that over time, I think we just keep talking about what do these scores mean and what do these scores tell us and how do we use them to actually get to the goal of trying to improve outcomes for students.
Yeah, so Mr. Fueling, just a quick follow-up. I do appreciate that. I think Mike and I do generally agree. And I don't want you to think that I feel the size tests are the holistic approach, because they're not, and I've never been a huge fan of them, but they are there, they are relevant, and they're the measure a lot of people use to hold us and other districts accountable. Businesses and families look at moving to areas based on how schools are doing. So I think maybe the next piece of this might be then, if we want to stand up and say, hey, they're important, but they're not the whole thing, how do you think we approach then, say, the legislators on something like this and say, hey, stop weighing us down with all this stuff. Really, this is the challenge, and this is where we should be directing our attentions, and this is the balance.
That is a fantastic question, Trustee Cassiopo. I think politicians, those in government, often will base their success on things that they have added to the system, not necessarily things that maybe have been removed to improve the system. And that it's hard when, you know, for a government official, because they want to say, look, I did this, and because of this, this is most likely going to happen. And I think the teaching and the learning on their side that has to occur, and I feel like it's evident. I mean, the burden that has come onto education in the last 30 years in the name of education reform has been immense. And I think that is a part of, Trustee Cassioppo, you mentioned earlier, kind of the burden felt by teachers and schools in trying to show improvement here. That a lot of that comes from a lot of these changes that have come with education reform and trying to find that ultimate metric of accountability that we can always come back to. I think it's building relationships, just like anything. In our community, it's advocating locally, trying to explain what is happening, explain why this metric is not the most important metric, why we should look at other things, what are those other things we should look at, hopefully being able to show some success in those areas. And if you have that kind of buy-in from your community, and maybe then that is a great testing ground for trying to get buy-in at the state level to say some of these things need to change. And truly, if I was going to be strategic about it, I am working with our counterparts up in Washoe and down in Clark County, because if anything truly is going to change anytime soon, we have to have those relationships in place with those school districts. We're all on the same page talking about the same things, because I don't believe that any of them would disagree with this concern about, you know, that standardized tests can be a metric, but there's a whole lot more. And so trying to take some of that burden off of schools, the improvements that could happen. If we could talk about the other things that we could do. So in the Commission on School Funding, and this is a slight digression, but there's a point to it, we talk about, you know, what is needed to provide adequate education in the state of Nevada. And based on all the studies that have happened, it's like an additional $2 billion. It's some enormous amount of money. The question is not, do legislators want to, I think, put more into education? I think they do overall. I think the fear is, what are you going to get out of it? What are we saying? Look, if we're going to meet adequacy, we're going to start pushing more funding into education. For what? What are we going to do? And part of the problem is Nevada's been so chronically underfunded for so long. I don't think a lot of us have a great answer to that question. So it's something that if you are talking to legislators and talking to other districts about this and how to approach it, say, look, if we're not looking at the standardized tests as the be-all, end-all, then what? What matters? This is the crux of the question. This is what dominates for all the people in education, educational leadership, educational philosophy, academics. What matters? And lots of people have different ideas, and not everybody agrees, but there is not a clear-cut answer. But I think it would be beneficial to us as a state, the districts in the state, to say, this is what we believe matters. We can go to legislators and say, look, this is a part of it, but this, and this matters. So what can we do to support that, or maybe take some of this burden off so that we can focus on these other points that are important to us?
Thank you.
Mike?
So, AJ, one of the questions that comes to my mind as we're going through this process and just reflecting on this district and this community, this is a great opportunity for whoever is offered this position. And we're certainly taking it very seriously. And so the question I'm wondering is, why are you that candidate?
So the superintendency is something that I have thought about before I came to Nevada. And some of it was maybe seeing some superintendents that I didn't think were quite up to task. And I have a really deep desire, and I talked about in my other interview the first interview, that when I first graduated from high school, went to college, I was going to move to New York and just make a bunch of money and just roll around in that money for a while. And then I did a semester abroad in Australia, and that completely changed my worldview and my view of what I valued in my life, and came back not exactly knowing that I wanted to go into education, but knowing that in no way was the path I wanted to go down anymore. And within about a year and a half, I realized that education was where I wanted to go. So this idea of service and wanting to do better and wanting to be a part of improving society and improving the situation for all of us, I think, kind of ingrained at that point. I think that while I clearly have not been a superintendent and I have not been a principal, I've had experiences, and not just a superficial experience, really deep experiences, not only on the teaching side, but on my finance and operational side, and really becoming a leader in the state when it comes to items related to school finance, and working with other superintendents in other districts. And you just see this. I mean, to me, it feels like a natural progression. So much of what I want to do is fight for education. And this is, for me, the ultimate spot to be able to do that. If I'm going to advocate, I clearly may not be the best candidate for this position. I'm okay with that, but you will not have a louder advocate for what is happening in this district and what is happening for education in this state. I think I have already proved that to some extent with my experiences here, and I think it would only grow. With being a superintendent, people tend to pay you a little more attention, so that opportunity will help and present itself. I mentioned you have Dr. David Jensen up in Humboldt, and former superintendent in Elko, Jeff Zander, and those are two people who carry a lot of weight when it comes to legislative conversations about education. They are very well respected, and these are people who understand. I mean, they really more so understood the finance side of things and the operational side of things. I have that teaching background where I understand the instructional side as well. As a final piece, I would say there is really something to be said for having skin in the game. So there's a saying, I think it's Warren Buffett, who I love his sayings because they're very folksy. But don't trust a cook who doesn't eat his own cooking, or don't trust a chef that doesn't eat his own cooking, right? So who am I accountable to? Clearly you, and clearly to 3 kids that I have in the schools and their friends and their friends' parents, who already in my position, when I'm around, they find a way to come and talk to me about what's happening in the schools. And I can only imagine, I remember being a teacher, and it was in a small town. We lived in the small town for a year. And I couldn't, at that point, was doing so much, and I'd go to the grocery store, just going to get some milk. And I'd have students coming up to me to talk to me, and parents coming up to me to talk to me. And so this is already something that I've gone through, and a part of what I know. I know that's what this will become. If I didn't want to be held responsible for that, and if I didn't care about all of those parents and all of those kids, all of my children's friends, and trying to make this happen for them, I would never have put my name in this hat for consideration. I think, again, skin in the game is really important. If you go back to aligning incentives, there's nothing better to align it with. So not only, I want my kids to be successful, but there's about 7,800 other ones that I'd like to see go down that same path.
Thank you. Any other questions of the board? We got about 11 and a half minutes left, and we want to leave some time for Mr. Fielding to be able to ask questions. So if there's any other questions, we can probably take one more before we let him ask us.
Yeah, Rich, maybe one more question, and I'll keep it short.
Okay, go ahead.
Mr. Fueling, you brought up mental wellness, and I think you're right on with that. It's mental wellness of the students that is equally as important to the academics, but kind of switching it to staff mental wellness. You know, these have been trying times. What will you do as superintendent to make sure the mental wellness of not only students, but staff at all levels within reason is being addressed?
Thank you, Trustee Cassioppo. So I guess first, if you don't mind, I would just like to go back quite a ways here. But under goal 1, I think there is, in my mind, strategy 1.4.4 that I've added to this recognizes that there is a need. We already offer employee assistance programs. Clearly, we want to keep that going, but looking at what else we can do. I truly believe, I mean, there was clearly burden on staff before COVID. After COVID, it was overwhelming in many cases, I think, for many of our people. I would, so this year, I had the opportunity to substitute up at Carson High School for several weeks, and then actually substitute over at Mark Twain when the Omicron variant made its kind of rampage through. And seeing firsthand what our teachers were dealing with and how difficult it was and how distracting it was. And then on top of that, hearing, so many of our parents were not really happy with a lot of the items happening related to COVID mitigation and teachers taking direct shots because of that. So we have an opportunity now where it seems like we're moving past that portion. So that can be set aside. I think it is really important for our staff then when you're talking about the community, anybody needs to feel like whatever they're doing, it's one thing to ask people to put in an inordinate effort to make great things happen. And it's another thing to do that and then not be recognized, and even worse, to be vilified in the process. And to me, that has happened across the country, and that is something that absolutely has to change. The perception of our teachers, I mean, teachers should be held up high. You hear these stories out of, say, Japan, where teachers are so well regarded. They're basically like heroes in that culture. And I don't know if it has to go to that point, but recognizing that our staff should be recognized for all that they do, that the staff is recognized by the community, they're recognized internally by their supervisors, by the superintendent, by their kids. I think that will do a lot to help with the mental burden that has been placed upon them. I think there are things we can do in the short term related to this, but it really is a long-term effort to try to support our teachers and working through and building that emotional capacity to deal with so much of what has happened. Beyond that, it's not, there's no great incentives that you can offer to improve mental health. I think it's more a kind of a systemically ingrained thing, and we may not be able to control the larger, national society and the view of education, but again, if I'm a teacher and I'm putting in all this work and I know that my parents and my community value me, I know that I have parents coming in, and maybe this isn't happening exactly at the secondary level, but parents are running to the school, they're running toward the school because they want to be a part of what is happening. They see the success, they want to help out, they want to volunteer. It humanizes everyone again, talking face to face. We're not in the comment box of the newspapers or on Facebook. We're face to face and recognizing the value of each other. I think those are steps that go a long way. And I guess in simple terms, having the community more involved and parents more involved in the schools and doing some of these things to make sure we continue trying to support staff, trying to respect time, trying to find ways, like kind of going back to some of these other items, trying to gain efficiencies, time efficiencies, and what the actual expectations are that need to be covered in every classroom so that it's really clear and it can be focused. And so this amazing instructional magic that happens, I mean, to me, the lesson is like this sacred item because it takes a lot of time to build it. And if it works and it works really well, that is such a great feeling. And so if you know that you're creating these amazing instructional items and you're not having to spend time maybe necessarily doing things that are not moving you towards these ultimate goals, and so you have more time, you have time for your grading and time for reflection, I think all of those sorts of things would benefit.
Excuse me. Thank you. We have about around 4 minutes now, if you have any questions for the board.
I didn't know I'd have the opportunity to ask you questions, so I don't have any prepared. I don't have any questions. I just really want to thank you again for the opportunity to be here. It's a very meaningful opportunity for me, and being a part of this community, and hopefully being a part of improving our moving kids towards the goals we have here, and building that community support and parent support for it.
Thank you. We'd like to thank you for your interest in serving as superintendent of the Carson City School District. And thank you for coming forward today and giving us this presentation. We much appreciate it. And thank you again.
Thank you.
And with that, we're going to go into recess. We'll go into recess and we'll reconvene the meeting at 7 p.m. this evening. Thank you, guys, and thank everybody who attended today and everyone who watched the presentations.